It's a joy to gather together to pray and to be encouraged in the word of the Lord. I would like to go straight into the scriptures that I have been thinking about as I think about this time of prayer. I'd hoped to share my screen, but it seems Zoom is in a different mode today. So I will continue without sharing the screen. What I was thinking about when I thought about what to share today is a passage of one verse in the Bible that says, it's in James chapter 5, that says Elijah was a man just like us. To encourage us to be reminded that prayer is for all of us, ordinary people. Now read for us that verse, James chapter 5, verse 17. Elijah was a man just like us. He prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and it did not rain on the land for 3.5 years. Again, he prayed, and the heavens opened, gave rain, and the earth produced its crops. And the thought about Elijah being a man like us, some versions say a man of like passions like us, that he was a person who had fears. We read that in 1 Kings chapter 18, chapter 17, 18, when the story of Elijah begins. We see in chapter 17, this particular verse that's being referred to. In verse 2, it says that, in verse 1, it says, now Elijah the Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next 3 years, except at my word. And in observing Elijah, when you look at the Old Testament, the commands that God had given the children of Israel, he said, if they walk in sin, there would be no rain. And so it seemed Elijah was standing on that proclamation of the word of the Lord, because King Ahab had really brought, in chapter 16, he says, verse 31 of chapter 16, Ahab, son of Omri, verse 30, did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. He not only considered it trivial to commit the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, but he also married Jezebel, daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and began to serve Baal and worship him. And continues there with the kind of sins that Ahab was involved in. And so Elijah, maybe he was standing on the promises, on the cause-effect promises. If you do this, I will do this. If you are sinful, I will not send rain. And he comes with such boldness to the king and says, there will be neither dew nor rain. He was a man who had fears, just like we do. We see him afraid of the queen Jezebel. We see him a man of faith, waiting on the Lord, and a man also who was engaged in the word of the Lord in the sense of what was available then. Verse 2 of chapter 17 says, the word of the Lord came to Elijah. He was waiting and listening for the word of the Lord. And as we get into prayer this morning, as we continue in as being prayerful people, I want to encourage us to continue in the word, because out of the word we get the promises of the Lord. And we are reminded in our core values, in our vision statement, that these ordinary people, the ordinary people that are participating in the ministry of the Navigators, in many walks of life are leading integrated lives. That integrated life is not just where we are at, but also the prayers that we engage in. In the first paragraph of our vision, it reminds us of the promises. It says, they believe the promises of God. Both personally and in committed communities, they seek to know and pursue the purposes of God. The previous line says they are marked by a deep engagement with an obedience to the scriptures as the word of God. That as ordinary men and women, God is not asking us to be any extraordinary apart from being soaked and found in the scriptures and being found in the prayers, people who believe the promises of God. Trusting God to do what he said he would, even when our hearts and our minds are fearing that the situation does not look pleasing. Standing in the promises of God and persevering in the promise, in the prayer, rooted in the promises of God. And so as we go into a day of prayer together with the rest of the community, and to encourage us to be reminded of the promises. As we trust God for nations, as we trust God for our siblings and our friends to give their lives to Christ, I want us and I encourage us, like Elijah, to be found standing in the promises of God. To stand on the promises even when we are afraid. To stand on the promises on behalf of others. The passage in James, the verses before says, if is any one of you suffering, let him pray. And I see that conclusion of Elijah that says he prayed earnestly. He didn't just pray passively, but earnestly. The ESV version says he prayed fervently that it might not rain. So he didn't just come to the king and say, I've just said a prayer this morning, but since he was really stayed in prayer, listening and seeking God before he went to appear before the king. And to encourage us, friends, to pray fervently. The passage in James again tells us to pray fervently, not just like Elijah, but as an act of faith. For whoever comes to the Lord must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. And so I invite us this morning to pray not just passively because the prayers are written out for us in the prayer guide, but to pray fervently, to engage our all in prayer, to seek the Lord with our all, to listen, not just to pray passively, to say and mumble words, but to listen. What is the Lord saying? Because as we trust God for nations, as we trust God to answer the prayers of our Asian, our other African brothers, to also come with a spirit and a mood of openness that if God is sending anyone, it could be me, it could be you, it could be someone else amongst us, that we would trust, we would be available as part of being fervent that the Lord would send us. So I invite us this morning, I invite us throughout the day to participate not in reading the prayers, but to engage our all, to be ordinary men, ordinary women, praying fervently to the faithful God, and to expect that the Lord who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all we could ever ask or imagine, will answer these prayers that we pray, and even more prayers that we pray in a way that we did not imagine, and in a way that will grow our faith. So I invite us to participate together. I pray that in our groups, in our communities where we are at locally, we will experience and we will get to know God more. We'll get to walk with him deeper and closely for the whole of the day.